Hello, friends. On May 24, 1941, a single shell from Bismarck tore the Hood, Britain's proudest ship, in half in just 3 minutes. It was the Royal Navy's most devastating single-ship loss of the entire war. Today on Frontline Legends, the full story of Bismarck, from construction to sinking, and the wreck lying 4,800 meters deep. Let's dive in. Bismarck is the most famous and most tragic battleship of World War II, the symbol of Kriegsmarine power, and at the same time proof that even the most powerful ship can sink in minutes. It was the largest warship ever built by Germany and one of 2 Bismarck-class battleships, the second being Tirpitz. Length 251 meters, beam 36 meters, draft 9.9 meters, full displacement 50,954 tons, standard 41,700 tons. This made it one of the heaviest battleships in history at the time of commissioning, second only to Japan's Yamato and Musashi. For comparison, British King George V, 42,337 tons, American Iowa, 48,000 tons, French Richelieu, 47,548 tons. Bismarck surpassed them in displacement and armor, though it yielded to the Japanese giants Yamato, 72,800 tons, and Musashi. The power plant consisted of 3 Brown Boveri geared steam turbines, producing 150,070 horsepower on the shafts. 4 shafts with 3-bladed propellers, 4.7 meters in diameter. Maximum speed on trials in the Baltic Sea in November 1940, 30.12 knots, 55.78 kilometers per hour, an outstanding figure for a ship of that size. Cruising speed, 28 knots, economical, 19 knots with fuel consumption of 200 to 250 tons per day. Range, 8,870 nautical miles at 19 knots, or 8,525 miles according to other sources. This allowed Bismarck to operate in the Atlantic for weeks without refueling. Armor, one of the most powerful systems of its time. Main belt, 320 millimeters Krupp cemented steel in the center of the hull, thickened to 320 millimeters around ammunition magazines and machinery spaces, tapering to 170 millimeters at the ends. Upper belt, 170 millimeters. Main armored deck, 80 to 120 millimeters over machinery and boiler rooms, 100 millimeters over magazines. Lower deck, 20 to 50 millimeters. Main battery turrets, face 360 millimeters, sides 320 millimeters, roof 180 millimeters, barbettes 340 millimeters. Conning tower, 350 millimeters. Total armor weight, about 18,400 tons, 36% of full displacement. This made Bismarck virtually invulnerable to most guns of the era at medium ranges. Main battery, 8 380mm SKC/34 guns in 4 twin turrets, DRHLC/34. Range with armor-piercing shell, 36.2 kilometers, shell weight, 800 kilograms, muzzle velocity, 820 meters per second. Rate of fire, 2 to 3 rounds per minute per gun. Fire control system, 4 directors with 10.5-meter rangefinders and a Fumo 23 radars, later Fumo 26. Secondary battery, 12 150mm L/55 guns in 6 twin turrets MPL/36, 16 105mm L/65 AA guns in 8 twin mounts, 16 37mm SKC/30A, A guns in 8 twin mounts, and 20 20mm flak 30/38 machine guns, later increased to 58 barrels. Anti-torpedo protection, 3 longitudinal bulkheads and liquid-filled compartments 5.5 meters wide. Crew, 2,065 men standard, 65 officers and 2,000 ratings, up to 2,600 in combat conditions. Life aboard was harsh. Cramped quarters, turbine noise, constant vibration, permanent battle readiness. Officers' cabins were relatively comfortable, but for enlisted men, bunks in compartments of 50 to 60 people, meager rations, bread, canned goods, potatoes. Captain, Kapitän Sursee, Ernst Lindemann, 1893 to 1941, graduate of the Naval Academy in 1913, First World War veteran, gunnery specialist. Served on battleship Schleswig-Holstein, cruiser Emden, taught at the Naval Academy, known for his cool-headedness and precision. He said, "A ship is not just iron, it's a living organism, and it must feel the hand of its commander." Admiral Gunther Lütjens, 1889 to 1941, commander of Operation Rheinübung, flagship admiral aboard Bismarck, experienced World War I submariner, commanded U-9 and U-68. After the war, staff work in the 1930s, Chief of Fleet Staff. Believed surface raids were Germany's only chance in the Atlantic. Operation Rheinübung, breakout into the Atlantic to hunt convoys, destroy British shipping, and divert Royal Navy forces. Bismarck and Prince Eugen left Gotenhafen on May 18, 1941. Route through the Kattegat, Skagerrak, Norwegian fjords, then the Denmark Strait. On May 21st, in the Grimsey Fjord, they were spotted by British agents and a reconnaissance aircraft. On May 22nd, Bismarck and Prince Eugen entered the Denmark Strait, where they were detected by cruisers Norfolk and Suffolk. On May 24, 1941, at 5:35 British ships, Hood and Prince of Wales, under Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland, met Bismarck and Prince Eugen. Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, the world's largest battlecruiser, displacement 42,000 tons, but with an outdated armor scheme, belt 305 millimeters, thinner aft, deck only 76 millimeters. Prince of Wales, new King George V class battleship, not yet fully manned, Y turret, not operational. At 5:52, Hood opened fire at 26 kilometers range. Bismarck replied at 5:55. At 6 o'clock, at a range of about 15 to 17 kilometers, the third salvo from Bismarck, or Prince Eugen's, still debated, struck Hood. A 380 millimeter shell, or 203 millimeters from Prince Eugen, penetrated the upper deck, passed through the armor protection, and detonated in the aft X-turret magazine, igniting 112 tons of cordite. Hood was torn in half, capsized, and sank in 3 minutes. Of 1,418 crew, only 3 survived. Sailors Ted Briggs, Bob Tilburn, and Anthony Dudley. This was the Royal Navy's heaviest single-ship loss of the entire war. After that, Bismarck became the primary target of the entire British fleet. Admiral John Tovey on King George V, Admiral James Somerville on Renown and Ark Royal, cruisers Norfolk and Suffolk, destroyers hunted him down. Bismarck took a 380 millimeter hit from Prince of Wales in fuel tank number 2, lost 1,000 tons of fuel, speed dropped to 28 knots, headed for repairs in Saint-Nazaire. On May 26, at 20:47, a torpedo from Swordfish, Lieutenant Eugene Coombs, struck the port side in the steering compartment, jamming the rudders at 12 degrees left. The ship lost steering, began circling with a diameter of 1,000 meters, became an easy target. On May 27, 1941, at 8:43, the final battle began. King George V, Captain Wilfred Patterson, and Rodney, Captain Frederick Dalrymple Hamilton, opened fire at 22 kilometers. Bismarck returned fire, but jammed rudders prevented maneuvering and fire correction. In 90 minutes, it took 400 to 500 large-caliber hits and torpedoes, total 2,750 rounds of 406 millimeters and 356 millimeters shells. The ship burned from bow to stern, all turrets knocked out. Speed fell to 7 to 8 knots. At 10:15, Lindemann ordered abandon ship. At 10:36, Bismarck capsized and sank at position 48 degrees 10 minutes north, 16 degrees 12 minutes west. Of 2,200 men, only 110 to 115 were saved. British rescued 110, U-74 picked up a few more. The battleship was lost in less than 6 days after sailing. But Bismarck stood out in World War II not only for its power and tragic end, it became a true turning point that changed the entire naval war and strategy on both sides. It sank Hood, the symbol of British naval power, in 3 minutes. This was the heaviest psychological blow to Britain since Trafalgar. Churchill later wrote, "The loss of Hood shook the entire fleet and nation more than any other disaster of the war." After that, Churchill issued the famous order, "Sink the Bismarck," and threw virtually the entire Royal Navy into the hunt. 8 battleships and battle cruisers, 2 carriers, 11 cruisers, 21 destroyers, dozens of aircraft. It was the largest naval pursuit in history, involving 40% of all Royal Navy forces in the Atlantic. It proved the end of the battleship era. Bismarck was not sunk by another battleship, though Rodney and King George V heavily damaged it, but by obsolete Swordfish biplanes from carrier Ark Royal. One torpedo in the rudder, and the world's most powerful battleship became a helpless target. This was the first time an aircraft carrier effectively decided the fate of a super battleship. After Bismarck, Hitler lost all faith in surface fleets, and on May 22, 1941, banned major battleship operations. Tirpitz remained in Norway until the end of the war, afraid to leave port for serious operations. It forced Britain to completely change convoy protection strategy. Before Bismarck, the British believed battleships could operate relatively safely in the Atlantic. After it, every German raider breakout became a nightmare. All forces were thrown to intercept. This diverted carriers and battleships from other theaters, weakened Malta and Mediterranean defense, and even affected the Far East. It became the most expensive ship in history in terms of the cost of its destruction. The British expended ammunition, fuel, and resources equivalent to several battleships just to sink it. Ark Royal alone launched 15 torpedo bombers in the final attack. Total hunt costs: hundreds of millions of pounds in 1941 prices, billions in today's money. It created a myth. Bismarck became the symbol of the last night of the seas, one against an entire fleet. German propaganda made it a hero. British propaganda, a demon. To this day, it remains the most famous naval duel of World War II after Midway. Movies: Sink the Bismarck, 1960. Books: Ludovic Kennedy, David Woodward. Games: World of Warships, where it remains one of the most popular ships. Bismarck is everywhere. After the war, Bismarck's wreck was found in 1989 by Dr. Robert Ballard, the same man who found Titanic. The hull lies at 4,791 meters depth, broken in half. Bow section torn off, but the hull itself is remarkably intact. In 2001, James Cameron filmed a documentary with deep-sea footage. The wreck shows Bismarck was not sunk by Rodney's torpedoes. It sank from scuttling after all guns fell silent. This confirms Lindemann's version of self-scuttling. Bismarck became a symbol of German fleet power, of naval war tragedy, of the end of the battleship era. After its loss, Hitler banned major surface fleet operations. Tirpitz stood in Norway as a fleet in being, but never ventured out again. Battleships gave way to carriers and submarines. Bismarck's story is the story of how one ship can change the strategy of an entire war and remain in memory forever. That's the story of Bismarck, the battleship that in just 6 days of life made the whole world hold its breath. One shot, and the entire naval war changed. If you enjoyed this dive into legend, if you want to see more such epic stories about Musashi, Tirpitz, Shinano, underwater aircraft carriers, and the craziest ships of World War II, hit the like button, subscribe to Frontline Legends, and turn on notifications. Only here you get rare photos, accurate facts, deep details, and the real atmosphere of those times. We don't just tell stories, we take you to the front line. The next video is already in the works. Thank you for being with us on Frontline Legends, the place where legends come alive. See you soon.